product better. Like the Bloomingdale Trail, the line that I mentioned, even though the public process wasn't as accepted, right? It didn't inform all of the design of the project. The ideas of some of the interactions and access and way people it would interact once they got on the trail was informed by it. So we can go back and show it, and I'll say that one's very controversial because the success of that project, the 4 adjacent neighborhoods have now actually had rise in their housing prices. So there's a lot of people that are really frustrated with the project, as opposed to it having achieved a way to bring community together. It has also achieved a separation because of some of the economics around it. So we know, and our part was smaller in that, but we know that that's an example where we should have gone back and continued the conversation. So I know it doesn't fully answer your question, but it's trying to touch on it.
Next question, which is that, when you do community engagement, is it multiple inputs into, so it's like many people give input into design, so it's many to one kind of a conversation, or is it many to many conversation, which is then curated, as you were saying, with your design idea, with your design ability to understand what that conversation amongst many people has been, and then trying to find a solution out of it?
So it's probably a bit of both, which is an easy way to answer that. But what will happen is it's almost never many to one. All of the workshop work we do has, we've had students volunteer, we've had interns work on it, we've had senior architects work on it, where there are multiple people over here that somebody's having, someone else may be, writing on a board. So when you already have someone in the room, it's a little bit easier, because there's already an audience that has made a decision to engage. We're starting to do more and more, and we're small, so we're not necessarily doing enough of this yet. We're kind of trying to build towards it, is where we build in the integration tool. So this is where technology and other things come in. So when we did the resilience workshop, there's a shareyourstorychicago.com. So we actually built a website, and then we actually had the URL codes available. So the idea was, if you were in a farmer's market and we had boards, you could immediately enter your story, and you could share your story or an image even if you didn't participate. So I think that multiple layers of access is becoming more and more important, and that's the way you can have multiple
different things. And so whose decision is it then, so who does that negotiation?
So optimally you go back, right? We almost never do just one workshop, and I think that's the other thing to convince people like politicians and others, right? How do you allow me to engage with community more than once? So 3 is a reasonable number, more is better. And if it's 3, we might get some raw content, some of the questions we're getting about kind of what do you do. So we'll take that raw content and kind of semi-process it. So we might, out of the raw content, and come back as, hey, we heard about resilience, we heard about security, we heard about natural spaces, and we heard about something else. So we will be gut checking. So we may have not drawn anything at that point, but we will have a chance to re-interact. So we're gut checking back. It's like, hey, we heard from 40 people. We heard these 4 ideas. Did we do it right, right? Did we get it right? And when you start getting to sort of the 4 or 5, we can start to then talk about light and green spaces more important than private interaction. So we're never going to be able to give everybody everything that's being desired. And we try to be very transparent about that from the beginning. We're like, this is a process, and we're using the process to distill, and as often as many touch points as we can get. Sometimes those touch points might be a more intergroup, like a stakeholder group or a building committee or a smaller audience. So sometimes we're able to work with the same people multiple times, and sometimes we have to distill to like a smaller audience. But we try to do it, if you have at least 3 touch points, that's definitely much stronger. We can't go in once. I think that's the problem. I think with politicians and other entities, sometimes it's like, oh, you do the design and then come put a board at the front, and then we'll ask people to say it's okay. But that, to me, misses the community process, because you didn't use the process to actually inform what was put on the but there is a growing number that are really engaging much earlier on.
I just have one last question. Sorry, so many questions, but it's something so dear to our heart. So we've been trying to do something called Streets for People, which is with architecture colleges, and trying to share the idea that you should do community engagement, that your design process must be informed with community processes. I mean, in BNCA, it was amongst the first colleges that we did interact with several years ago. But often colleges don't do it. Architecture, planning, urban design colleges don't do it. And so what's your experience? Do such colleges, design colleges, actually take it seriously? Could they take it seriously? What's the future like for community engagement in design process?
So the future is promising. I'm convinced of that. Particularly in the States, as a particular example, is that there's conferences and workshops and moments in time where it's like, hey, if you're interested in community process, there's a 3-day conference over here. So what's happening is smaller groups of students within the larger institutions are then sort of self-identifying that community engagement is really important. And then they're going back to the schools and sometimes asking for more. It's not easy. I partly have been able to do a lot of student interaction because the interdisciplinary classes are a little more independent. They're not as much of the core curriculum, so there's a lot of freedom in how you structure that. And then I also just sneak stuff in. But that, I think the more students see what the impact is, like the students that have done some of the international projects here, particularly with the UN, I'm guessing, have seen sort of some of the direct impact of the work that's being done. And then, I mean, we can even talk about maybe some specific examples that are in other places that can then come back and inform. It doesn't always work to say, hey, this worked over here, or hey, look at this other place, but we're also learning, and this is something I need to pull more research on, is the economic impact of this work. So if you can start translating that into numbers, hey, 20 people came to a conference and then or came to a workshop, and then we built this thing, and $20,000 of income's being generated every weekend because people come to this place where they didn't used to come. That's what's going to translate. That's what will convince people to allow you to do it again.
We'll have one last question.
As designers, it has always happened, or somebody might have experienced it, that what we design, the final output is kind of a little deviated or slightly different. So as you were saying, a lot of people are involved in a project. So like, what are your perceptions of what you have seen in the final output? Or was it closer?
Yeah. That's a good question. It's a mix. So the one disadvantage of doing a lot of workshop and strategic planning is we're at the front end of work. Not every project is going all the way to fabrication, but when we do, this project in Englewood as an example was someone, if they have a business, could sit at their coffee table or their dining room table and work on a plan or work on conceiving of an idea. So instead of trying to make private offices, what we heard was people wanted a chance to interact with other business entrepreneurs or have learning classes. So in that case, we made a classroom and then some open space, a conference room, and then some more private space. And like, frankly, right, the conference room had an open window, and originally there was no money to put the glass in, and then we walk in one day and there's these house windows with blinds stuck in this opening. So as an architect, you're like, oh my goodness, it didn't do what I thought it would do. But I have another client, there's it's sort of a combination of sort of office and community engagement, like interactive spaces. And they've been buying a lot of furniture themselves. I went over the other day, some of the colors had changed. And so I think it's partly embracing it. Like, how do you work with that dialogue? Because especially with smaller projects and more private clients, you will always have that moment. But I think if somebody understands why you're doing it, and why you're doing it is informed, even if it looks a little bit different or materializes a little differently, I think if the why can be held on, you're doing well. You're in a good spot.
Thank you very much. I think vision in projects. I would like to make a point here. Ma'am is presenting in Mumbai day after tomorrow at the Women in Architecture conference by Hikar Foundation, right? And some of them are actually going there. So wonderful. They'll get to see more other sides of the civic projects as well. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you here, ma'am. I would first like to thank Sharvia sir because he got us in touch with Monica ma'am. They have been colleagues at Archidesign, Archiworks, yeah, at Chicago, and since then they've known each other. And I think with the kind of scale of projects that we got to see today, one thing that my takeaway is that if we involve the right people at the right level of interaction and right level of thinking of a project, you can actually get the project executed the way people want it more than just designing a project. But like sir mentioned, political will is very important, and taking the political will into account and getting them to execute a project is very important with a country like India. So I think that takeaway is important for students to participate into workshops or community projects, and there are a few colleges in the city who are doing excellent with that here. So thank you to Kashyap sir. Unfortunately he had another engagement today, so he had to leave. Thank you all of you here for being with us today evening, and we look forward to have you for the lecture series here as well. Thank you. Just could you please join for a group photograph? The volunteers and the professionals here, could you join for a group photograph on stage?